Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's case is called The Forgetful Fish Farmer. When Christine Reinhard met Craig Williamson in the fall of 1990, it was love at first sight. They were at a sweat lodge retreat in Port Townsend, Washington, where they meditated and explored their spirituality, also forming a strong and fast connection with each other. By the end of the weekend, Craig asked Christine to dinner, and a month later, they were married. Craig loved everything about the sea. As the new couple made their home in Olympia, he fished and dove for sea urchins while Christine drafted and organized maps in her work as a cartographer. Despite their happiness, Craig had always dreamed of owning and running his own fish farm. When land beside Christine's parents' Wisconsin home became available, the couple decided to make that dream a reality. They would throw all of their money and energy into establishing a tilapia farm where they would raise their stock to sell at markets and to restaurants. With $80,000 saved, they borrowed another $160,000 from Christine's family and an additional $255,000 from the bank. Their new shared dream started coming true. As the market for tilapia grew, Craig decided to branch out to other suppliers to supplement their ever-decreasing stock of fish. A deal was struck with a woman in Alamosa, Colorado. On August 27, 1993, Craig began to make the trip from Wisconsin to Colorado in a school bus the couple had bought and converted to haul equipment and water tanks. Christine wasn't too happy about the trip. Just a few weeks before, Craig had suffered a concussion, and she worried about his ability to make the long drive. Assuring her that he'd be fine, he left with $2,500 in cash that was to be used to purchase backup generators. Once he arrived, he rented a car in Colorado Springs and drove to visit the supplier in Alamosa. He then drove back to Colorado Springs where he shopped for generators. On August 30th, he called Christine at about 9 p.m. to say he was returning the rental car so he could start the drive back to Wisconsin early the next morning. He asked her to call him at his Super 8 motel room at 5:30 a.m. to wake him up. The next morning when Christine called, there was no answer. By the third phone call, she was starting to worry and asked the hotel to please check on her husband. When staff entered the room, they stated that Craig wasn't there and his bed had not been slept in. When Christine called police to report him missing, she was told to wait 24 hours and then to call the department back, just in case he called or was found. At the end of the 24 hours, she still hadn't heard from Craig and filed an official missing persons report. When investigators entered Craig's hotel room on the 1st of September, they immediately noticed that most of his belongings were still inside. The couple's converted bus was parked outside, but oddly, it didn't contain the tanks of fish that everyone expected to find. Even though there were no signs of a struggle, Craig and the rental car were still missing. Under Christine's insistence, police opened a homicide investigation. Within 24 hours, Craig's credit cards were found sitting on a shelf in a grocery store in El Paso, Texas, a town and state far from the route that he would have traveled on his way home. 2 weeks later, his rental car was found in Juarez, Mexico. Again, there were no signs of a struggle, but investigators did find several whiskers that forensic experts said had been cut and looked as though they were trimmed from Craig's beard. Christine felt that she needed to participate in the investigation and traveled to Colorado to talk with officers. As the search went from weeks to months with no sign of Craig, she began talking to television stations and reporters to raise awareness of her missing husband. Unfortunately, police had started to push back on the investigation. They were confused by the credit cards being found on that location and those beard trimmings. Lead detectives told her that they felt her husband had run away when he became overwhelmed with a new business, new marriage, and a massive amount of debt. The credit card placement seemed to be breadcrumbs left to mislead investigators, and the trimmed beard hair suggested Craig was actually trying to change his identity. Christine would hear none of it. She insisted that things were fine between the two and that he would never leave her in such a way. On September 15th, a retired nurse traveling by train from Montana to Denver, Colorado, reported that she had seen a disheveled, confused man on board who seemed agitated and talked about fish tanks. With her training in the medical profession, she said that she was sure that he had a head injury. When Christine met with the woman and showed her pictures of Craig, the woman was convinced that was him. That was when Christine began to come up with her own theory. She started to believe that Craig had been mugged in Colorado and had received a second head injury. This, coupled with his recent concussion, had given him amnesia. The thought of the man she loved wandering state to state in confusion tore at her and spurred her on even more in her search. Christine and Craig's family traveled to train stations along the nurse's route and distributed posters all the way through to the last stop in Washington, but no other trace of him was ever found. With her 2 dogs, Christine traveled thousands of miles distributing posters, searching homeless shelters, talking to residents, reporters, and even psychics, but nothing brought any new solid information. Everyone felt that Craig was long gone, and Christine was just chasing a dream. Quote, "I'll ask anybody for anything. I have no hesitation to beg, borrow, or plead for help to get Craig back. I can't live with myself unless I do this." As she continued her search efforts, the relationship with law enforcement became even more strained. They claimed that her search was complicating theirs. She was told to stop, or officers would end their investigation. She didn't listen and continued on. In October of 1993, near the couple's 3-year wedding anniversary, she started to lose hope and became desperate. In 1994, Christine was given a golden opportunity. She was able to persuade Unsolved Mysteries to air a segment on Craig's disappearance. The show aired on May 25th, and with reruns and syndication, ran another 8 times. More than 100 tips were generated, but none led them any closer to Craig. The couple's farm was now up for sale, and Christine had moved to the Pacific Northwest to continue her search. In July of 1995, after seeing a re-airing of the Unsolved Mysteries episode, a man in Florida contacted Christine, saying he was Craig. He told a familiar story, claiming that he was mugged in Colorado in 1993 and woke to find himself in a hospital with a wristband bearing the name Ron. Reportedly, he was suffering from amnesia. After a period of wandering, he settled in Key West, Florida, where he worked as a diver under the name of Craig Ron Williamson, a name only slightly different from his actual name, Craig Dwight Williamson. When law enforcement traveled to Florida and investigated his claims, they found that he had first worked at a marina where his boss said he was a good employee, but toward the end of his time there, he started to have trouble with his head, stemming from his injury during the mugging. At no point did Craig talk about his wife, their fish farm, or living in Wisconsin. After that, he became a self-employed diver. Christine's reunion with Craig was not the happy event that she had envisioned. After several telephone conversations, she told reporters that they were trying to take things slow, as Craig was very fragile and in a very delicate emotional state. She claimed that in their conversations, his memory was extremely impaired and he acted very paranoid and scared. In the end, Craig reportedly never fully regained his memory, and he and Christine divorced, although they do remain friends. Craig moved to California to start over, and Christine moved to Wyoming to start a new life for herself. Investigators, however, were very upset with the whole situation. Craig's search had cost them tens of thousands of dollars, and none of them believed his amnesia story. But they could find no concrete evidence to file any charges against him. When Craig was asked if he would press charges against the men who had mugged him, he declined. In the end, everything was simply dropped. In exasperation, Sheriff's Captain Lou Smith said, quote, "People can just disappear and cause a lot of work for a lot of people if they want to. Case cracked. I would like to thank the Buffalo News, the Seattle Times, the New York Times, the Post-Crescent, and Green Bay Press through newspapers.com, and of course, Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case. And here she is to discuss it with us right now. Well, Christy, this is a story. It's interesting because we don't quite have a crime, unless you consider breaking someone's heart a crime. If he actually did intentionally break someone's heart, there's just so many levels of different questions here. But I think you and I both agree, what a dedicated woman.
I can't believe what she went through.
Yeah.
My gosh, we can all hope to have somebody like that in our life.
Seriously. Yeah. I was just very moved at the effort, and it's such a good example for the other cases that we look into where we have missing loved ones. And just to give you some insight into the lengths that they go through, the dedication that they have trying to find their missing loved one. This is just a great example of all that. Kind of with an unfortunate ending. We're going to get to that. I know one of the questions that you had brought up in the notes you sent over was, how was he able to call his wife? I mean, this guy sees unsolved mysteries, and even outside of that, he's in Florida at the time. And I know for their search efforts, they cover a lot of the country, but I don't think they ever actually got to Florida. So even if she had her phone number on a poster or something like that, it's not likely that he was actually seeing that poster anywhere, especially back then. This is, kind of pre-internet era search efforts. So what'd you think about that? Do you have any ideas on how he called his wife?
Unless he just picked up a phone book. I mean, a lot of us don't have phone books anymore. Some of y'all won't even know what that is.
I was going to ask, what is that?
Yeah. Especially a countrywide phone book like that. I mean, regional's one thing, but
yeah,
that's the only way I can think of, is that he either called information and talked to the operator, because there used to be real live people.
Yeah.
Or he picked up a phone book.
Yeah, I guess her name isn't too common. You might have been able to call information if it was listed, because back at that time, we actually had options about not listing our number and stuff like that. I don't know what happened to those choices, but you also put something else in the notes here. He didn't just call his current wife; he called someone else.
Yes, he called his ex-wife as well.
What? So,
yeah. How in the world would he even know who she was to call her?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And do you know, was she in the Unsolved Mysteries coverage? Did they mention his ex-wife at all?
From what I saw, no. It was all about him and his current wife. They had, footage from their wedding. I don't believe his ex-wife was mentioned at all.
Wow. Very strange. Obviously we've got a big question here, and that's really, do we believe the amnesia thing? And the investigators were very clear. They don't believe it. Kind of interesting to me that the story that he comes up with is essentially what his current wife, said on Unsolved Mysteries was the case. He was basically just acknowledging a theory that she put together, which honestly we don't know. And the one piece I know, we did mention that he had a boss that was interviewed. The boss mentioned that he was having some trouble with his head, but do we really know if that was in particular from the mugging? Did he remember the mugging and tell his boss, oh, that was specifically from the mugging? Or could that have been the concussion that he had suffered before he even went off on this whole trip?
That's a very good question. I know when he talked to his current employer, he was able to give him little bits of information. But if I'm remembering right, he said he woke up in the hospital.
Yeah.
I don't think he had specifics about a mugging or anything like that. Just he had taken a beating for some reason and was in the hospital. So even that looks odd. Yeah.
So how would he even, I don't know. I've done some research. I'm going to work some quotes in here about amnesia. In general, trauma like that happening, your memory around the actual event will, at least from the expert opinions I'm reading, that is the most likely to be wiped out. That's the most likely for you to actually forget. If he was mugged and he was attacked, the details of that attack probably wouldn't be there. Some of the other claims on the other stuff we're going to get there, but I wanted to touch on something before that. Credit cards left in a grocery store. It seems like that is trying to throw a trail off. You're leaving credit cards somewhere where you're hoping at least from my perspective. You're hoping someone's going to pick them up and go use them, and that's going to create a little bit of an investigative spider web and pull their attention to other places, while you're taking a rental car and jumping the border to Mexico, which honestly, for criminal charges, I was wondering about that. Like, how long do they let you have a rental car without returning it before they're saying, okay, this car has been stolen? Oh, and by the way, he took it to another country.
That's another good question.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they didn't throw charges at him for taking the car, if nothing else. But
something.
Yeah. So yeah, the whole thing around the credit cards being left in the grocery store, it sits weird with me. So is this real, or is this a theory that sounds like it came from a movie script? Yehuda Ben Yaseh, who is director of the Brain Injury Day Treatment Program at New York University Hospitals, has a quote here. The typical movie thing where the guy is just fine except that he can't remember who he is, doesn't recognize his wife, that's fiction. And when I see these movies, I'm laughing at the naivete and stupidity of it. Apparently, these are experts saying it just doesn't happen like that. David A. Hovda, director of the UCLA Brain Injury Research Center, says the odds of a really widespread memory loss from injury are minuscule. From an injury that leaves the person otherwise all right, that's pretty much unheard of. So what he's saying is the trauma to your brain to effectively wipe out memory of that chunk, something that big, would be so traumatic to your brain, you wouldn't be okay anymore. And I even saw them cite a case from the 1950s, which they're saying, hey, look, this is the closest that we have to this kind of Hollywood version of this person can't remember anything anymore. And it was a case where the guy was getting like brain surgery and having parts of his brain taken out. It was like super, super extreme. And there was all kinds of other ramifications. You can't just, get hit on the head and wake up and go, who am I? David Hovda also says, it's frightening, but it can be appealing too. It's the ability to start over and remake yourself. It's the ultimate second chance.
Yeah.
And that's something that when I look at this story, there seems to be a pattern of, they're meeting at this kind of spiritual retreat where it seems like, hey, obviously he was married before, so he's going through some type of reboot. Then they put together this big dream. They're going to move. They're going to go to a different state. They're taking on all this debt. That seems like, okay, here's another reboot. He's then trying to extend the business, leaves, has a bunch of cash on him. The things that he's supposed to buy, none of those things wind up in the bus. He disappears. It really seems like it's a chain of him starting over. And then ultimately, when she does find him, what does he do? They get divorced and he starts over again. So I don't know. What do you think, Christy? After hearing these quotes, what do you think the odds are on the amnesia thing being true?
Honestly, zero.
Yeah.
I felt before, just from the information that I had read, and there were too many little things that he got that he should have never been able to find out or know. That just really kind of cements it in my mind. I don't think he had amnesia. And I feel so sorry for her because she believed it right up to the end. And I couldn't even find anything showing that he was responsible for any of the debt that had been taken out. For all I know, she took care of all of that too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Who knows what was going on with the market at that time? Was she able to sell the property at something close to the same price to get all those debts cleared?
Yeah.
No, this woman took a lot on, and it sounds like a lot of it some of it she shouldn't have been on her own in terms of taking on once this guy took off. But she was doing everything she could for the person that she loved, and it's hard to knock someone for doing that. So.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah. My heart really goes out to her. It's really terrible what she went through. Anything you want to say before we end here?
No, I don't think that I do. I'm still just struck by this woman.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your help on today's case, and I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, new patrons, Patricia Huntley, Michael Day, Margot Burton, Hazel Arcturus, and Tina T. Also, a big thank you to Britzkrieg for increasing your pledge. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, or buy merchandise. Case Cracked is frequently demonetized by YouTube, but We know learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases that we cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. Please also don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon below if you'd like to catch one of our weekly secret live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new Unsolved Mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.